I'm joined now by Dan Abrams. He is, of course, a host on News Nation. He also runs Mediaite, part of the Long Prime Network as well. Dan, thanks so much for being here.
I'm glad to be with you.
So perhaps let's just start out because obviously this is a really consequential election and there's going to be, Donald Trump has kind of already hinted at it to some degree, some perhaps legal challenges if things go wrong. You certainly saw that after 2020. Even right now, some of his closest allies like Kari Lake, they're still talking about some cases that they have in the courts, for example. Is there any degree where the 2024 election becomes a little bit like 2000 and it's just so close that it ends up in the courts kind of fighting back and forth?
Well, first, let's say I hope not. I hope it's not going to be one of these situations where this is all being fought in the courts. But yeah, it's certainly possible. I mean, particularly if Donald Trump loses. And, you know, I don't think that that's a statement of picking a side. Donald Trump has made it clear already that he is sowing doubt about the election. He is sowing doubt about Pennsylvania. And as a result, I would think that if he loses, that the next step for him is going to be a court fight. Now, let's be clear. If it's really close, they're both going to be in court. Yeah. They're going to be fighting over each and every ballot. But if it's not that close, as it wasn't in 2020, meaning not close enough for a handful of votes to change the result, I think that the focus will be on Donald Trump.
And because I mentioned Kari Lake, she is polling extremely poorly right now in Arizona, and a lot of people are kind of blaming that in large part on the fact that she really is focused on the last election, and her focus on some of these policy issues that people are talking about is perhaps not as strong as it could be. When we're talking about it from a political standpoint, how much is kind of this focus on the last election perhaps, drawing some attention away from the issues that it...
Well, it's interesting because you talk to Republicans, the top Republicans, and all of them will say, we need to stop talking about 2020.
Yeah.
We need to talk about 2024. And they're right, by the way. That is the right answer. The problem is that most of them aren't talking about 2020. The vast majority of Republicans are not talking about 2020. Donald Trump still talks about 2020. Mm-hmm. But I think more importantly, the question becomes, how does that impact what happens in 2024? If we have another situation where it seems pretty clear that there is a winner, and if it's Kamala Harris, what are Republicans going to do if and when Donald Trump still declares victory and insists that he lost because of fraud? And again, it's going to depend on that margin, because I don't begrudge Donald Trump and his legal team for making a variety of arguments pre-election. Remember, it's not just post-election. There have been enormous legal fights that have been happening before the election. Which votes will be counted? When does a ballot have to be received? What happens if there are mistakes on a ballot? Does it still count? These are all critical questions that are being determined in the courts before the election. And, some people criticize the Trump team. Well, they're challenging this and they're challenging that. Look, they both are trying to play the game to be able to get as many of the votes counted that they want counted.
Yeah, and of course, Republicans aren't the only ones who have challenged election results in the past. But I guess if we're just talking about moving forward in this election, you talk to people on your show every day about the election, about some of these policy issues. I don't remember the last time necessarily there was on mainstream media a conversation about some of the policy issues. A lot of the time now it's kind of focused on the drama-based politics.
Yeah.
How much is that kind of contributing to the sense of apathy that Americans...
Well, look, part of that is the fault of both the candidates. When you push Donald Trump or Kamala Harris on, we want to get specific here on the deficit. I want to get specific on your tariff plan. I want to get specific on how you're going to be different than Joe Biden. You get these sort of broad, it's going to be great. It's going to be better. I'm going to be awesome. And you don't get a lot of the specifics. You get a few here and there. You get a few, but that's part of the problem, is that as they both are trying to win this election, they're both coming a little bit closer to the middle. So on some of the policy matters, it's not as if they're even saying that they're that far apart. Question becomes, do you believe them? There are a lot of people who would say that Kamala Harris sure sounds like a lot more of a centrist than she did before. Do you believe her? Do you believe she's going to stand by that? And I think that's part of the reason why policy hasn't been front and center. They both have policy papers. They both have websites where you can go and read their policies. But when you see the interviews, and both of them are pushed on it, they're both pretty vague.